Very good. We are going to call to order the September 8th, 2011 Assembly Committee on Appropriations. Madam Secretary, I recognize a quorum. Please establish it for us.
Fuentes.
I'm here.
Harkey. Bloomingfield.
Here.
Bradford. Here. Calderon. Here. Campos. Here. Davis. Donnelly.
Here.
Gatto.
Here.
Hall.
Here.
Hill.
Here.
Lara. Mitchell.
Here.
Nielsen.
Here.
Norby. Solario.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
Very good. We have a quorum, ladies and gentlemen. So let's begin with Mr. Bill. Mr. Bill, you are presenting for the Pro Tem, is that correct? Pro Tem couldn't be here?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and members, you've heard this issue before in another form, so I'll be brief. This is SB 946, health care coverage for autism. SB 946 requires health plans that are regulated by the California Mental Health Parity Law to also provide coverage for behavioral health treatment for autism spectrum disorders. Behavioral health treatment is now accepted as the single best form of health care therapy for these disorders, and SB 946 accomplishes the following steps. One, defines those behavioral health services that are medically necessary, and two, establishes guidelines for the providers of these behavioral health treatments. Although some of the service providers are not licensed, SB 946 provides a framework of excellent oversight and supervision that is consistent with accepted community standards and best practices. Currently, the regional centers are providing many of the medically necessary services for these disorders. Therefore, SB 946 would result in significant cost savings to the state by ensuring that the health plans and insurance companies are doing their fair share. The bill is not about cost shifting. It's about providing medically necessary services. We are bringing SB 946 before you today because I think parents of autistic children should not have to spend their days and sleepless nights battling with health plans and insurance companies of providing medically necessary services that can provide hope and may improve the lives of their loved ones. Testifying today in support is Mr. Rick Rollins and Greg Dwyer. I respectfully ask for your aye vote on this measure. Thank you.
First witness in support.
Thank you, sir. Rick Rollins. I'm here with a number of different hats on. I'm a parent of a son with autism, a co-founder of the UC Davis Mind Institute, also the legislative advisor to ARCA, the Association of Regional Center Agencies, and I'll be brief. The policy committee has heard this issue now and approved it twice with overwhelming support. Before your fiscal committee, I just would like to point out in your analysis the cost of this bill to the state is minor. And in fact, at the regional center system, we believe that since we spend $330 million a year on ABA services for kids with autism, that this bill will help offset those costs at a time when the regional center system and support for people with developmental disabilities is under siege. I would urge your aye vote on this very important piece of legislation. Thank you.
Greg DeGier with the ARC and United Cerebral Palsy. This is an important bill for the entire developmental disability community, both because it helps so many people with autism and their families, also because it relieves some of the cost pressure on the regional centers and on the state general fund to hopefully avoid some even worse cuts in the future to everybody. We've also learned in the last couple of days that it's an important bill to the developmental disability community nationally, who believe that the federal government will look to California in developing the elements of the required services under health care reform, and this would be beneficial to the whole country. We support the bill.
Next witness in support.
Yes, Jim Gross on behalf of the California Association of Applied Behavior Analysis, which are the professionals who provide these services, and the Behavior Analysis Certification Board, which is a nationally accredited organization that provides certification to these individual providers. There have been some questions about the language with respect to the unlicensed professionals, and I'm here to answer any questions that any of the members may have. Thank you.
Andrew Governor, Governmental Advocates, here on behalf of Autism Speaks, the nation's largest advocacy organization for families with autistic children in strong support. Thank you.
Michael Martinez here on behalf of the Department of Insurance. We are in support of this measure. We are one of the 2 state regulators that oversee health insurance regulation, and we do feel that currently under the California Mental Health Parity Act that it does mandate the coverage of this treatment, and so we also, though, are in support of the intent of this measure as well. Thank you.
Next witness in support. Any additional witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition.
Mr. Chairman, members, Ignacio Hernandez on behalf of the Consumer Watchdog. We actually haven't opposed unless amended position on policy grounds, so I won't go into those, but I just will reiterate we are concerned not with the intent of the bill, we support it fully, but the opponents who have argued that somehow the Mental Health Parity Act may not cover this treatment already, which I know the proponents of the bill and the authors of the bill have already stated it is covered and mandated now, but somehow this bill would be used in litigation to argue that the Mental Health Parity Act does not cover it either now or when this bill sunsets. So that is our concern, and we're working with the author's office to clarify that existing law, to clarify we have those protections now and in the future, and that's the basis of our concerns.
Next witness in opposition.
Charles Bakke with the California Association of Health Plans. Good afternoon. We are here in opposition to this bill. It's going to increase premiums for private purchasers of health insurance. That includes employers and individuals who buy our health care products by hundreds of millions of dollars. It also, while it exempts CalPERS, it does not exempt local governments or the UC system, so there will be some governmental costs to this mandate. We also want to point out that the reason why benefit mandates have been held this year is that their passage now if it's done in advance of the essential benefits could build general fund pressure for the state of California if any of our benefit mandates exceed the federal minimums. This bill tries to solve that problem by turning this mandate off if these services are not in the federal definition. The on-the-ground impact, though, on parents and for health plans and for legislators is that these benefits will then be taken away from parents potentially only months after we've started providing them to them. We think that's bad public policy and is a reason why we think this bill should be put over until we know the essential benefits and what they look like. And then also just like to point out, we understand that the author and sponsors are trying to avoid state costs, and in doing so, they're exempting the Medi-Cal and Healthy Families program. We did some quick math last night, and we believe that represents about 40% of California's children won't have access to these benefits because they're either in Healthy Families or in the Medi-Cal program. So only parents who have insurance through their employer or who can afford to buy health insurance will have to cover this benefit, and others will not have access to it. So we believe shifting these social services and educational services onto health plans is a bad idea, and we ask for your no vote. Thank you.
Stephanie Watkins on behalf of the Association of California Life and Health Insurance Companies. We also echo Mr. Bakke's concerns, and we'd like to bring up, in addition, potential liability concerns we have about the unlicensed, uncertified providers that are currently made in the bill. We generally believe that we want to provide a quality of care and a network for our members, and the idea that we would potentially have people who have access to vulnerable children and the potential liability is a great concern to us, so therefore we're opposed to the bill.
Marty Fisher on behalf of the California Chamber of Commerce, and we're opposed.
Maureen Higgins representing America's Health Insurance Plans. We're also opposed for the reasons stated.
Very good. Any additional witnesses in opposition? Very good. Members, questions or comments for our author?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to point out that we have submitted three technical amendments to this bill, and those have been submitted.
So the author would like to have amendments?
Those are author's amendments.
Very good. Members, any additional questions or comments for our author? We'll entertain a motion to move. So moved. Very good. The bill has been moved and seconded. Members, that measure is out as amended on a B roll call. Very good. Mr. Simidian. Mr. Simidian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. This bill has been through 2 of your policy committees, and we have been working to incorporate their input with respect to amendments to the bill. So the bill that is before you reflects amendments that have already been taken, and as you know, Mr. Chairman, there are now additional amendments before you and the committee. I should reference the staff analysis on paragraphs 3 and 6 on page 1. This, I think, reflects an earlier version of the bill, or perhaps an incorrect version from the Legislative Information System. So those are both items that are now out of the bill. And staff did a very good job of analyzing the provisions. It's just that now they're out of the bill. So for members who had issues with those provisions, once again, paragraphs 3 and 6 are out of the bill. And I think probably the easiest way to introduce members to the bill at this point is to say that Senate Bill 226 is designed to address concerns regarding the California Environmental Quality Act on matters relating to scoping meetings, the use of categorical exemptions for projects resulting in greenhouse gas emissions, environmental review for infill and solar projects. Earlier, as I mentioned, there were provisions that dealt with solar on so-called disturbed ag lands. Those are gone. Would have been a great area to make some progress on, but we just concluded we couldn't get it done this year, Mr. Chairman, and so given the controversy, put it aside. Similarly, there were provisions that dealt with the concept known of document dumping, also known as late hits. All parties agreed that it was worth dealing with. We had one group of folks who said, you've gone too far. You've got another group of folks who said, no, actually, you made it worse. And we had another group of folks who said, you're really right in the right place. If you'd only use our language, it would be great. At that point, we said, you know what? Let's take that up next year. So what's in the bill now? As amended, the bill responds to concerns about CEQA by dealing with concurrent action, that is to say allowing public agencies to comment on planning and zoning matters concurrently so that there isn't the delay of sequentially with respect to project scoping meetings under CEQA. Second, on the issue of greenhouse gases, the bill prohibits a project's greenhouse gas emissions from causing a categorical exemption to be inapplicable if the project complies with regulations adopted to implement related statewide, regional, or local plans as provided in the CEQA guidelines. Streamlining for infill, and here again the most recent amendments try and clarify the infill language, which has been the subject of very helpful conversation between Assembly leadership staff and our own Mr. Pester, who's sitting here from the Senate side. The notion here is that we would authorize a transit proximity project to be reviewed in accordance with CEQA streamlining provisions of SB 375. So that was Senator Steinberg's bill back in 2008, prior to the adoption of a Sustainable Communities Plan by a metropolitan planning organization. There are other provisions that revise the infill provisions at 2109 4.5 and on. The goal here, members, is to say what can we do sooner rather than later to provide some streamlining under CEQA. Some of you know that bills have been pushed before that essentially were efforts to toss CEQA altogether out the door or to toss it out the door for a specific number of projects. Those efforts have been rejected previously. People reasonably and legitimately came back and said, well, if you can't do that, what are you prepared to say yes to? This, it seemed to me, was something we ought to be able to get consensus on and get to yes on these issues. Some of you will recall that last year I did a more modest bill that both then Assemblymember Logue and Assemblymember Fuller were co-authors on the bill with me on. This is an effort to take the next steps, try and keep CEQA intact, but streamline it during a difficult economy. Good for job creation, we hope, good for businesses as well. Respectfully ask for an aye vote. Thank you for your patience with the amendments, Mr. Chairman.
First witness in support.
Mr. Chairman and members, Scott Wetch on behalf of the California State Association of Electrical Workers and the California State Pipe Trades Council and the Western States Council of Sheet Metal Workers. Collectively, my clients believe that we should move forward with CEQA reform, but we should do it in a very measured and thoughtful manner. This bill that's before you has been the subject of a tremendous amount of discussion for a rather lengthy period of time. We feel it moves the ball considerably forward, and we are therefore very proud to support and urge the adoption of SB 226. Thank you.
Next witness in support.
Mr. Chairman, members, Donna Brownsey on behalf of the Solar Alliance. We are here in support of the bill. In particular, we want to thank the author and the other stakeholders for removing the language with respect to CEQA and disturbed lands. That's something that will need to be worked out with all of the stakeholders over the interim, and we look forward to that process. We do support the specific provisions in this bill that we've worked out with the senator and with his staff with respect to rooftop solar and, more importantly, parking lots in terms of providing very clear rules in that regard. The Solar Alliance doesn't take a position on any of the other provisions of the bill. Simply, we appreciate the work on the solar CEQA provision for rooftops and parking lots. Thank you.
Very good. Any additional witnesses in support? Witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition?
Sarah Ross on behalf of the League of California Cities, and while we appreciate the author's efforts on most of the bill, the amendments on September 1st with Sections 7 and 8 we think are not going to really help local government. In fact, we think that the exemption is probably something that we won't be able to use very often, if at all. Although we think that we're going in the right direction on it, we just think it's not ready to go into a bill and into law at this point.
I'm sorry, before you leave there, can you tell me exactly where your concern is?
Yeah, it was Section 7 and 8. This deals with the CEQA infill issues. It was the September 1st version, which may not, those are the two sections. It's the new language that came in last Friday.
Very good. Let's go ahead and take additional witnesses in opposition. I'm wondering if it's the same area of concern here. Witnesses in opposition?
Good afternoon. Cassie Gilson on behalf of the California Building Industry Association. We are opposed unless amended. I want to commend the senator for his leadership on CEQA reform. We have no issues with the solar provisions in the bill. It's just one section, Section 8, which deals with CEQA streamlining for infill. And the difficulty is it doesn't help us at all, and in fact sets a precedent that we think could be harmful to getting infill properties redeveloped. And here's why. In order to qualify for the streamlining, the bill requires that you build within half a mile of a major transit corridor. Also, in order to qualify...
I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Does anybody have a current copy of the bill? It's what you have, members, before you is not the current copy of the bill. So Senator, my confusion is only because what I have in front of me, for example, on page 12 of the bill, it says here Section 7. I'm told that this is not in the bill now.
I'm going to ask staff to respond based on the latest communications they've had.
Sure, I just want to make sure that we're talking from
I appreciate this, and I appreciate the patience of members. The last 36 hours are a little hectic, and we're all doing the best we can, and we're also trying to get to yes with legitimate concerns being raised.
Yes, actually, the provisions that were stricken from the bill from OPR doing guidelines is on pages 8 and 9 and the top of page 10.
This is in the September 6th
the September 6th version
of the bill.
So I'm sorry, I was thinking that item number 3 here related to those provisions, and those were stricken. So OPR is not going to do a categorical exemption for infill. That's stricken. As for the standards for development to be used for the infill provision, those are still in the bill because they're tied to Section 21094.5.
Which page is that?
That would be on page 12, Section 7, beginning on line 17.
So that is still in the bill?
That is still in the bill. What is stricken from the bill is the previous version, and I'm sorry that I was thinking that Section 3 related to the guidelines change, which has been stricken from the bill, but they will still be doing standards if a lead agency chooses to take advantage of the infill provisions that are in Section 6 of the bill.
Okay, members, so let me correct myself. What you do have in front of you is accurate. So we're talking about page 12, section 7, line 17. Okay, very good. Thank you.
And one other thing, too, section
Sure.
relating to late comments, section 6 is out of the bill. That has been out of. That was stricken already on the analysis. Item 6.
Okay, in the analysis.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I have the analysis again, please? Mr. Chairman, I mentioned it perhaps too briefly in passing earlier, but again, for members who are looking at the Assembly Committee analysis, the issues that are raised in paragraph 3 on page 1 are now gone.
No, I'm sorry. They are relating to the standards. Those are in the bill.
Relating to the standards, those are in the bill, but the OPR provisions.
The OPR doing a categorical exemption for infill has been stricken from the bill.
Portion of that.
And that is on page 8 of the
Then
currently.
paragraph 6 that dealt with the issue of document dumping.
On the analysis on page 1.
Yes, thank you. Paragraph 6 that dealt with document dumping is gone.
Your staff agree with that? Yeah, okay.
Yes. And then looking to your own staff, at the top of page 2, there is language about in paragraph 8, and that language is, in fact, in the bill.
Oh, those are going to be in the amendments.
In the amendments to the bill, forgive me.
Okay, very good. All right, so I know that what I'm looking at now. I'm sorry. If you could start again with your concerns, and if you can reference the bill, too, as you're going, so we're all sort of talking about the same thing.
So the nice thing is I'm not objecting to any of those sections that you just were discussing.
Very good. Members, can we have some order, please? Very good. All right, so your first concern.
And my hope is that we can work on this over the interim, fix it up, and then it can be ready to go next year. But the objection is to Section 8. And the reason for the objection is because in order to qualify for this streamlining, the bill says you have to build within a half a mile of a major transit corridor.
So we're talking about Section 8, page 13.
Yes.
Okay.
It also says you have to comply with all of the mitigation measures and best practices adopted by the local air district. And here's why that's problematic. In the Bay Area, for example, they have a concern about the particulate matter that comes from exhaust, a legitimate concern. And what they say is essentially, if you build within a half a mile, your readings for contaminants are going to bust our CEQA thresholds, and by definition, your project is significant, and you have to do an EIR. So the problem here is that in order to qualify for this, on the one hand, I have to build within a half a mile of a transit corridor, and on the other hand, I have to comply with these rules from the air district, which say if you're building within a half a mile because of legitimate concerns about air quality, you have to do an EIR. I actually think that the senator has hit upon a big public policy issue dealing with infill development. On the one hand, we don't want our kids being raised with too much exhaust close to major transit corridors. On the other hand, we all agree that we need to do infill in order to meet our greenhouse gas goals under AB 32, under SB 375. I think this warrants more discussion. You know, you have folks who are supportive of the concept. There's no reason this needs to go right now. I would put it in the category with disturbed ag lands and the late hits provision. Let's take it out. Let's get people around a table, and let's see if we can come back at the beginning of the year and have a provision that really does help us redevelop those properties in inner cities that need to be redeveloped.
Mr. Simitian, if you could respond to that.
On this point. Members, Mr. Chairman and members, this argument was raised previously, and as you can tell, we've had the conversation. It's a respectful conversation. This argument was raised previously in an earlier committee with respect to what was then a quarter-mile limit. I heard the argument and said, you know what? Let's provide twice as much flexibility by going out to half a mile. The argument is not that we're imposing anything new on folks in this area. I want to be very clear about that because I think that's easy to misunderstand. There's no imposition. We're streamlining for a group of folks who meet these conditions. The argument you're hearing is, we're not sure it's all that much help. Okay. What you're hearing from me is, I think it would be better if we took action sooner rather than later. We've been in a recession for 3 years. Let's try this and see if it works. The provisions actually end up sunsetting in 2015. Worst case, it doesn't work as I hope it will. Best case, it actually does. No reason we can't keep having a conversation after this year, but let's do something rather than sort of replicate our friends in Washington who managed to disagree about everything so long that they didn't get anything done. I'm trying to move the ball forward incrementally if we possibly can. The one other provision is there is somebody here from the Air Quality District, and they'll tell you that there are lots of areas where these provisions would not apply and where people could build within that half-mile radius, and that even if the provisions did apply, there are lots of mitigation measures that people could use in order to take advantage of the streamline. So worst case, it's not as helpful as I hope it would be. Best case, people will say, okay, we're ready to move forward. But the problem we're having with this bill, and we've had it all the way along, is that whenever you say, here's what we'd like to help with, somebody says, gee, that's great, now can we have more? And I understand that, but if we keep having that conversation, we're going to end up right back where we've been, which is sitting on our hands and not getting anything done.
Before we go to questions, members, there is somebody from the Bay Area transit area. So, I mean, since we talked about this being a Bay Area sort of problem, just to inform the debate here, if you could lend us your sort of thoughts on this. And I want to thank the witnesses for their patience, by the way. We'll get to everybody, but on this point, if you could proceed, please.
Certainly, Chair and members. Tom Addison with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. We're officially neutral on the bill. We very much appreciate the language in this section that is in the bill today. To remove that language would be problematic for us. I think the senator who's presenting, Senator Simidian, has done a very good job of characterizing exactly this issue for us and how it relates to the Bay Area's CEQA guidelines. There are plenty of projects that could go forward that are, would be given a significant CEQA streamlining by this bill. Furthermore, we think that there are certainly ways that you can do infill, not just next within half a mile of major transit corridors, but also very close to major freeways. Our CEQA guidelines urge you to do some things when you do that to protect public health. For example, putting a HEPA filtration system on your HVAC system. There are ways that we can build infill smartly and protect public health, and that's essentially what our CEQA guidelines ask folks to do. It doesn't make infill impossible, far from it.
But again, Mr. Chairman, just so we're clear, and I think even Ms. Gilfin will agree, there's nothing in the bill that imposes a new requirement in this regard. All of the provisions of the bill provide opportunities, some debate about how useful, but all of the provisions in the bill on this topic provide